Hey everybody, welcome to week 6 and your final garden kit lesson. Today, the star of the show is radishes, but if your radishes look anything like my radishes, they're not a star of the show. But we'll talk about why, and that's what you're going to learn today, is why some crops do better in the cold and why some crops do better in warm. So, as always, let's start with checking out all our crops. Let's start with the most exciting one here. Let's go down to the tomato plant. My tomato plant finally has a little tomato growing on it. Hopefully yours does too. So exciting. And this tomato plant looks like it's behaving and it's staying inside the cage, so I don't have anything I have to do with that one. I'm gonna bring your attention over to this tomato plant though. If your tomato plant looks more like this, you are going to have to maybe pull out the cage a little bit to gently tuck it in. You got to be careful, you don't want to snap vines when you're doing this. So that this tomato plant, once it gets really big, stays supported. There we go. So even my tomato plant that was little has little flowers now. So that means that tomatoes, you see that flower there? And there's some over here too. There's some buds. That means tomatoes are in our future. Hooray. You can look down here at the soil too, and there's a weed. I'm noticing that in a few of my plants this week. So if you start to see, you can come down to the thyme, same thing. If you're starting to see weeds, make sure you just pluck them, because weeds steal nutrients and water that our plants will like. So this is what my thyme looks like now. It's really come back. Even this one right here, that was looking kind of sad, is starting to come back. So hopefully yours are too, and you can just keep on harvesting them whenever you feel like you want to put some thyme in your soup or on meats or anything like that. They can handle a harvest. They'll pop right back. And let's come over here to the cilantro. I have one that is looking very nice. All of them have a dominant true leaf now, and it's gonna be, once your cilantro is about 5 inches tall, that's when you'll want to start harvesting it. So this is not big enough to harvest yet, but it won't be too long now. And when you after you harvest it, the cilantro will grow back as long as you don't pull the roots out or cut off the littlest leaf. So you'll be able to harvest your cilantro, and then it will keep on giving. This cilantro is a little bit sadder looking. I think it might have to do with my 4-year-old watering it one day. Put a little too much pressure on there. So just so you know, like, if your plants aren't looking great, it happens to all of us. And oftentimes plants come back. Plants want to live, so they're gonna do their best to do that. Let's look at our Thai basil. Mine really grew a lot this week. It's real happy. So this is what my harvest is going to be for today. So I'm just going to review how we do this. You go down to the next armpit, and you kind of can use your nail and pinch it off. And this guy, we could harvest down to the next one, or even the next one, and it'll come back. And you can harvest some of the side shoots, the main side shoots too. So feel free to harvest your Thai basil as you need it. And remember, Thai basil does not like to be washed before you use it. You should always wash your produce right before you cook with it, but it stores better if you don't wash it up front. And it does the best if you put it in a plastic bag and leave it on your counter at room temperature. So there's my Thai basil. Then let's come up here to the parsley. And I've actually harvested the parsley since I saw you guys last, and it's coming back in full force. So remember that the parsley likes to be harvested. It'll keep coming back for you. just always when you harvest it, leave that tiniest leaf. But all you have to do is leave the one tiny leaf. You can harvest it pretty hard. I saw some of your guys' pictures of your last parsley harvest, and you can harvest parsley harder than I saw in a lot of those pictures. So parsley is something else that will keep on giving. Now, last and maybe least is our radishes. I was planning on, folks, harvesting our radishes today, because in the springtime radishes really only take about 30 days, so they should have been ready by now. But these radishes, as you can see, are nowhere near ready to be harvested, and they actually look kind of awful. You see the little tiny holes in there? Those are from flea beetles. Flea beetles like to eat leaves in the Brassica family. That's what family the radishes are in. So maybe you have flea beetles at your house, maybe you don't. But that's certainly one thing that's putting pressure on my radishes. But the biggest thing that is putting pressure on these radishes is that it is not the season that they like to grow. Radishes like to grow in the springtime when it's nice and cool, and they just did not tolerate this hot weather. So maybe if yours were in a cooler spot, yours are doing better. I'd love to hear. But for the next thing I want to talk about is just what is the difference between cool season and warm season crops. Kind of when do different crops like to grow, and when is the best time to harvest them. And if you know this stuff, then you will be a much better farmer, because you'll know, like, for example, don't plant your radishes in the middle of the summer. Plant them in the springtime and they'll be really easy and you'll get big radishes. But if you plant them in the middle of summer, if you didn't know they were a cool season crop, you might be like, oh no, I'm a terrible farmer. But that's actually not the reality. It's that radishes just don't grow well in the middle of summer. So we're going to talk a little bit about what cool season versus warm season crops are. So the first thing I want to tell you is that definition. Cool season crops are crops that can tolerate cooler weather. They're crops that can tolerate temperatures down to about freezing. And some of them can even tolerate a frost. And there's a difference between a hard frost and a soft frost, we call it. A soft frost is when it gets down to 32 degrees, the freezing point, and then a hard frost is when it gets down to about 28 degrees. And you might be like, that's not a very big difference. What's the big deal? But a soft frost will kind of just like nip the plants a little bit. It doesn't freeze them completely. So there's a lot of varieties of plants that can handle just that, like being cold, but if they freeze completely, then they'll die. And there's some plants that can handle that deep freeze. So I'm going to give you some examples. Some crops that like the cold season. Radishes. I hope you already guessed that one. Also parsley. Parsley is going to be able to handle some deep freezes, that down to 28 degrees. And this, I'm telling you this now too, because this is our last session. So I'm not going to see you again, but your plants are still alive and they're going to keep growing. So I want you to know what to do with them going into the fall. So hopefully, maybe your radishes will grow, maybe they won't, but maybe as temperatures get cooler, they will start doing better. Your parsley you can keep around until it's really cold. Cilantro also is a cool season crop. That one you can keep outside until it freezes. A couple other examples are cabbage, kale, leeks. They're like a big onion. And spinach. Those are some really common cool season crops. They actually really like the cold, or they start to taste better once they get cold, because their leaves are like, oh no, it's getting really cold out, and so they start to make more sugars to give the plant energy, and so then that makes them even sweeter. So if you have ever had spinach or kale or a leek that you're just like, oh, this is so delicious, it's so sweet, it's probably because it experienced some cold nights outside. Okay, then there's a lot of other crops that hate the cold, that as soon as it gets cold, they die completely. It will kill the plant, it'll ruin the fruit, and so those crops obviously you want to bring inside or have harvested by the time you get your first frost. So a few plants in that category are basil. Basil is actually the most, you want to give a shot down to the basil here? Basil is actually the most sensitive of crops that we grow on the farm, and of crops that I know of that are grown in Minnesota. They actually will die if the temperatures get down to about 42 degrees. So they're your wimpiest plants out here. Tomatoes also will die in a frost. Thyme does not like the cold weather. Cucumbers, you better have all your cucumbers harvested by the time it freezes. Squash and eggplant are just a few more examples of warm season crops. All right, so if you know when things should be harvested in Minnesota, you will have a much more enjoyable farming experience and also eating experience. And so I just want to share with you a harvest calendar of some examples of things that are harvested throughout the season. Because if you know, for example, that radishes are best in June and strawberries are best in June, then even if you aren't growing your own garden, then when you're shopping, you know that that's the time to buy those things. They're going to taste the best. They're going to be the freshest. They'll be most likely to be local. So just to share with you a little harvest calendar, in June, some things that we harvest on the farm in June, lettuce, radishes, and strawberries. In July, we harvest cucumbers, zucchini, garlic, July is garlic time, and raspberries. In August, we harvest tomatoes, eggplant, onions, and blueberries. In September, that's apple season. Broccoli is... All right, so we were talking about when we harvest things, and we got to October. In October, that's the time of year that you harvest squash, leeks, and potatoes. So if you know that, you're going to be able to eat more delicious food and be a better farmer. So this is the last time I see you, but like I said, your garden's going to keep growing. So I want to give you a few tips about what to do as the weather gets colder with each of your plants. All right, and you probably can guess at what some of them are already based on what I told you if they were warm season or cold season. So the first one I want to talk about is the tomatoes. And if you remember, they're cold season. So they, if it gets cold, if it gets close to 32 degrees, that will kill them. And it will ruin the tomatoes. But never fear, there's a solution. You just should cover them with a sheet overnight, and then that will actually protect them from a soft frost. So as long as it doesn't get colder than 28 degrees, if it's between 32 and 28, you can cover them with a sheet. I'm not going to put it on now because it could break the stems, but that will protect your tomatoes. And then once it starts to be getting a hard frost, your tomato plant is probably just going to be done. You'll want to put it in the compost somewhere or put it in yard waste, because a tomato plant's not going to grow well inside in the winter. But your thyme will grow all winter inside if you can just put it on a sunny windowsill. Now you do want to make sure that you put a plate underneath, because when you water it, sometimes the water's going to leak out and you don't want to make a mess inside your house. But the thyme will last on a windowsill all winter long. Cilantro, same story. As soon as it starts, cilantro can survive a soft frost, like 1 or 2, but I think once it gets down to close to freezing, you're going to want to bring your cilantro inside and put it on a sunny window, near a sunny window, and it should last for you. Same with your Thai basil. If you keep it at a sunny window, keep it... a honeybee just landed on my cameraman here. It's buzzing by the camera. Maybe you'll get a shot of it. It really likes him. I think he might smell like honey. Um, so, Thai basil is the wimpy one, remember? So once your temperatures get below like 45, that's when you want to bring your Thai basil inside and put it on a sunny window, okay? Your parsley, that's the hardiest of the things that you've got out here. Your parsley will survive even a hard frost, and it'll actually get tastier. So if you want to leave your parsley outside until it gets below like 28 degrees, that is all right. And then our poor radishes. They can survive a soft frost. I am guessing that they're going to either be ready to harvest or they're just not going to grow. And so either, if yours, once they get to be about a centimeter in diameter, that's when they're the tastiest. That's when you'll want to harvest them. But if it never gets there, this is some good stuff just to add to your compost. So that is what you should do with your plants once it starts to get cold. And it usually doesn't get that cold until about October is when you're gonna have to start thinking of those things. But just watch the weather at night and you can be a good gardener and take care of your plants. Okay, you know already at this point how to fill out your journal and your harvest tracker. So I'm gonna trust that you do that on your own. But this question of the week is, what would you like to grow next year? Now you have a little knowledge about what to plant when and what to harvest when. So I'm curious, now that you've had a summer of trying out to garden, are you gonna do this again? And what would you like to grow if you do? All right, the last thing I wanna just tell you is that if you're loving this and you wanna learn more about gardening, your St. Paul Public Library has a ton of information. There's so many great books on gardening. You should go visit them and get some more books on gardening. Check it out. There's a lot to learn. There's always learning. And the other thing, if you are loving this, is you should come work for Urban Roots someday. We hire youth who are ages 14 to 18, and we might even be hiring some folks for this school year. So if you're interested in working for Urban Roots during the school year or in next summer, you should email me at jjandro@urbanrootsmn.org. Thank you so much for gardening with me this summer. I hope that you enjoyed it.
Bye.
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 Cameraman Sean, you want to say goodbye?
Bye, everyone.
Thanks to everybody. Happy gardening.